My name is Jonathan Aurelius Ward, and I never imagined the day would come when my own son would drag me into a courtroom like a strangerno, worse, like an enemy. When Nicholas Everett Ward sued me over my father's inheritance, he didn't just question my rights, he questioned my worth. He stood there confidently, chest lifted, telling everyone I had no claim, no legacy, no standing. He thought he knew everything about me, about the man who raised him, fed him, protected him. But Nicholas never bothered to learn who his father truly was. On the morning of the hearing, he walked into that courtroom with a smug grin, certain he had already won. But when I stepped through the doors, something happened that silenced the entire room. The Judge Atticus Kingswell shot up from his seat, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Wait, this can't be. You're..." And in that moment, Nicholas realized he had no idea who he was up against. I used to believe that the greatest pain a parent could feel was losing a child. I was wrong. The greatest pain is watching your child choose to lose you by his own hand. My son, Nicholas Everett Ward, was once the boy who used to cling to my leg whenever thunder shook the sky. The boy I taught how to tie a Windsor knot, how to hold his fork properly at formal dinners, how to look a man in the eyes when telling the truth. I raised him with everything I had, not wealth, not privilege, but values. Honor. Restraint. Discipline. Integrity. Values my own father, Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward, instilled in me long before I understood their weight. But somewhere along the way, Nicholas traded those values for ambition and ambition for greed. It began quietly, almost imperceptible, small comments, subtle shifts, questions that felt more like interrogations. He'd ask about my finances, about the Hale estate, about the details of my father's property. At first, I laughed it off. Children grow curious as adults, it's natural. But then curiosity became obsession. And obsession, as it always does, became entitlement. The day after my father's funeral, Nicholas arrived at my home in a tailored navy suit, not to comfort me but to confront me. His voice was cold, the kind of cold that only comes from certainty, dangerous certainty. "You don't deserve anything from grandfather's estate," he said. Just like that. No hesitation. No remorse. I stared at him, unsure if he was speaking out of grief or madness. "What exactly do you think I don't deserve, Nicholas?" "All of it," he snapped. "The Ward legacy belongs to the bloodline that actually matters. Grandfather respected me. He groomed me. Not you." The arrogance in his tone sliced deeper than any blade. I had no words, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't recognize the man standing in front of me. Nicholas pressed on. "You're irrelevant, father. You've contributed nothing of significance to this family name. Grandfather carried the Ward reputation. I will carry it next." The insult didn't sting as much as the realization. He genuinely believed it. I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off by dropping a thick envelope onto the table. Legal papers. A lawsuit. Filed by my own son. He didn't even stay to explain it. He straightened his suit jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked away as if dismissing an employee. When the door closed, the silence in my home felt colder than winter. Later that week, the paperwork arrived formally served to me like I was some criminal. Nicholas claimed I had no rightful claim to my father's inheritance. He argued I had abandoned the Ward legacy, that my father intended everything to pass directly to him. But the worst part? He believed every word. Friends whispered that Nicholas was being influenced by his mother, Eleanor Kensington Ward, and his calculating girlfriend, Vivian Moreau. Maybe it was true. Maybe they saw the Ward fortune as a ladder and Nicholas as the rung to climb. But it didn't matter. The betrayal was his. When word reached the legal community, people talked quietly, cautiously. A son suing his own father wasn't unheard of, but a Ward doing it? That sent ripples. I stayed silent through all of it. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. Because I knew one truth. Storms reveal character. And my son was about to walk into a storm he wasn't prepared to weather. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the moment Judge Atticus Kingswell saw my name on the docket, the entire case was already shifting. Not because of favoritism. Not because of sympathy. But because of who I truly was, a truth Nicholas never cared to learn. And soon he would. Nicholas always assumed I lived a quiet, insignificant Lithian ordinary man in an extraordinary family. And perhaps that was my fault. I never boasted about my work. I never displayed awards, never framed commendations, never spoke of the things I had done long before he was born. I never wanted my son to grow up in the shadow of a name. I wanted him to build his own. But the tragedy of life is this. When you conceal humility, others may mistake it for worthlessness. Nicholas certainly did. To him, I was the lesser ward, the one who didn't become a judge, the one who didn't bask in public prestige like my father, Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward. He never asked why. Never wondered what path I had walked. Never cared to hear the truth. And I never forced it on him. When Nicholas was young, I spent much of my time traveling. He thought it was for mundane business consulting, administrative work, maybe freelance legal writing. That's what I let him believe. Children need stability, not danger. They need stories that help them sleep, not truths that keep them awake. But behind those quiet explanations was a life completely different from the one Nicholas imagined. I worked in a world where shadows spoke louder than daylight. A world where a single misstep could unravel a case, a family, a life. A world where law didn't just exist in books or courtrooms, it existed in back alleys, coded messages, sealed evidence rooms, witnesses hiding behind new identities. For years, I served the federal judiciary in silence. Not as a judge. Not as a politician. But as the man the law relied on when things went wrong. My father once told me, "Jonathan, some men defend justice from the bench. Others defend it from the darkness." I became the latter. But Nicholas never learned any of this. Why? Because his mother, Eleanor Kensington Ward, made sure my absence meant weakness in his eyes. When our marriage crumbled, Eleanor took custody of Nicholas not to protect him, but to preserve her image. A polished socialite couldn't be married to a man whose work was veiled in secrecy. She preferred a narrative where she was the pillar of stability, and I was the distant, forgettable father. Over time, that lie hardened into Nicholas's reality. Whenever I returned home from an assignment exhausted, bruised, carrying the invisible weight of secrets, I'd find him already asleep. When he grew older, Eleanor told him I chose work over family. She never knew, or cared, what that work truly was. I tried to bridge the gap as he matured, but Eleanor's version of me had already taken root. Nicholas saw me as a man with no ambition, no achievements, no legacy. He admired wealth, prestige, and status, all things his mother flaunted with expertise. And so he drifted away. Little by little, year by year. Until the distance turned into disdain. Until disdain turned into entitlement. And until entitlement finally culminated in him filing a lawsuit against his own father. If Nicholas had asked me just once, "Dad, what did you actually do all those years?" I would have told him. I would have shown him. I would have let him see the man behind the silence. But he never asked. And now, as he prepared to attack me in court, he was about to discover the truth in a way he never expected. Not from me. But from the one man who knew my past better than anyone. Judge Atticus Kingswell. The weeks leading up to the lawsuit were a kind of storm that didn't arrive suddenly. It gathered slowly, quietly, in the corners of my world until it swallowed everything whole. At first, I tried to convince myself that Nicholas was acting out of confusion, maybe grief. My father, Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward, was more than just the patriarch of our family. He was a monument. Losing him shook every structure of our lineage. Perhaps Nicholas was reacting poorly to the weight of responsibility. But I soon realized it wasn't grief that fueled him. It was greed sharpened and shaped by the voices around him. Whispers began in the ward circles, those high society gatherings where people drank champagne and traded gossip like currency. Did you hear? Hamilton left everything to Jonathan. That doesn't make sense, does it? He and the Chief Justice were never close. Maybe Jonathan manipulated the will. I always knew he lacked ambition. Maybe that's why Hamilton tried to fix the family fortune. People spoke with confidence about things they knew nothing about. In our world, perception mattered more than truth. And Nicholas was a master at controlling perception. One afternoon, I went to pick up documents at the Ward Family Foundation office, documents related to the estate transition. When I arrived, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me. Some nodded respectfully. Others avoided eye contact entirely. The receptionist, a young woman named Abigail, leaned in and whispered. "Mr. Ward, I think you should know. Nicholas has been here. A lot. He's been telling people you're unstable." Unstable. That stung in a way few words could. It wasn't enough that my son questioned my right to my own father's inheritance. Now he questioned my sanity. A few days later, the newspapers joined in. Ward family rift, son challenges legitimacy of inheritance. Nicholas Ward claims father unfit to manage family legacy. Inside the War of the Wards. My name, Jonathan Aurelius Ward, was printed next to headlines implying incompetence and disgrace. I could have countered the story. I could have called a press conference, revealed my federal background, shut down the speculation instantly. But I didn't. Because the moment I used my past as a defense, it would no longer be classified. And I wasn't willing to compromise lives or operations just to save my reputation. So I stayed silent. My silence, unfortunately, became their proof. Nicholas, emboldened by the attention, escalated his attacks. He appeared on a podcast speaking with the practiced ease of someone taught by Eleanor Kensington Ward to always perform. My father, he's not the man people think. My grandfather trusted me with the future of the Ward legacy. He spoke as if I were a burden, an obstacle, a stain on the family name. But the worst blow came from Eleanor herself, me ex-wife, elegant as ever, in a pearl-white suit, giving an interview in that icy, rehearsed voice she once used to manipulate me. Jonathan always struggled to find direction, she said. I did my best to support him, but Hamilton believed Nicholas was better suited for leadership. This lawsuit, it's painful, but necessary. Necessary. The word echoed. For Eleanor, it was always about appearances. For Nicholas, about power. I didn't lose my composure often, but that night, sitting alone in my study, even the walls felt heavy with humiliation. Still, I refused to fight my son in the public arena. Not yet. But fate didn't wait for me. 2 letters arrived the next morning. One from Nicholas's attorney, Clayton Pierce, summoning me officially to court. And another from the Superior Court itself. At the bottom of the second letter was a signature I hadn't seen in decades. Judge Atticus Kingswell. A man who knew exactly who I was. A man whose life I had once saved. That's when I realized the storm wasn't just gathering. It had finally arrived. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than expected. Not cold in temperature, cold in atmosphere, cold in spirit, cold in the way a knife is cold against your skin. I dressed in silence. A simple charcoal suit, no flashy tie, no expensive accessories. My father, Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward, had taught me that real authority never needed decoration. Outside the courthouse, a cluster of reporters buzzed like flies around fresh wounds. Cameras flashed. Microphones shot forward. I kept my head down, my steps steady. A reporter shouted. "Mr. Ward, do you have a comment on your son's allegations?" Another added. "Are you contesting the legitimacy of your father's will?" I didn't respond. Truth does not respond to noise. Inside the courthouse, I moved through security quietly, almost anonymously. The guards treated me like any other civilian. They didn't know my past, and for decades, that anonymity had protected me. But the anonymity would end today. As I approached courtroom 3A, I heard the murmurs. It was already full. Spectators, reporters, attorneys, all hungry for tension. The War of the Wards, they called it. When I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the air shifted instantly. My son, Nicholas Everett Ward, was sitting at the plaintiff's table, flanked by his attorney, Clayton Pierce, and his mother, Eleanor Kensington Ward. Nicholas had a polished confidence about him, the kind of swagger only someone convinced of his own victory could possess. He did not look at me. He smirked instead, as if he were about to watch a chess game he believed he had already won. I took one step inside. Just one. And that was enough. Because the moment Judge Atticus Kingswell saw me, he shot up from his seat. His chair scraped loudly against the raised platform. Whispers rippled instantly across the room. The judge's face drained of color. His eyes widened not in confusion, but in recognition. As if he had seen a ghost. Or a memory he never thought would return. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Nicholas finally turned, confused by the sudden shift. I saw the moment confusion cracked his smirk, the moment he realized something was terribly, unexplainably wrong. Judge Kingswell leaned forward, gripping the edge of the bench. "Mr. Ward Jonathan." His voice trembled. I nodded politely. "Good morning, Your Honor." His breath caught in his throat. Then, Loderso, the entire courtroom could hear, said. "Wait, this can't be. You're—" He stopped himself, but the beginning of the sentence was enough to ignite chaos. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys whispered. Even the clerk froze, pen suspended midair. Only Nicholas seemed lost, staring between me and the judge like a man reading a language he didn't understand. Pierce stood abruptly, clearly threatened. "Your Honor, is there an issue?" he demanded. Judge Kingswell exhaled slowly, struggling to regain his usual composure. He cleared his throat. "The court will take a short recess." A recess? Before the case even began? That had never happened in my career. He stood again, walked off the bench, and disappeared into his chambers, leaving a courtroom full of stunned people behind. Nicholas rose from his seat, furious. "What the hell was that?" he snapped at his attorney. Pierce whispered sharply, "I don't know. But your father obviously failed to mention something." Eleanor squeezed Nicholas's arm, her perfectly manicured nails biting into his skin. I walked to my table calmly, my steps echoing louder than the chaos around me. For decades, I had lived in the shadows to protect others. For decades, I allowed my own son to believe I was less than I was. But today, the truth had walked into the room before I even spoke. The truth that Judge Kingswell knew better than anyone. I took my seat. Hands folded. Back straight. And for the first time Nicholas looked at me with something other than arrogance. He looked at me with fear. Because now he knew. This was not the simple case he thought it was. This was not the easy victory he had imagined. He wasn't fighting a weak, irrelevant father. He was fighting a man he never truly knew. And the courtroom had just learned it before he did. The recess felt like an hour, though barely 10 minutes had passed. In that time, the courtroom buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Reporters whispered frantically. Spectators pointed. Even court officers huddled together, trying to decode what they had just witnessed. But Nicholas. My son looked like a man who had stepped onto a stage expecting applause and instead found the audience laughing. His confidence, his arrogance was unraveling thread by thread. When Judge Atticus Kingswell finally returned, the room snapped back into silence. He cleared his throat, attempting professionalism, but his hands trembled when he lifted the court file. Let the record show, he began slowly, that the court acknowledges the entry of Mr. Jonathan Aurelius Ward, the defendant. His eyes lifted to meet mine for a second longer than protocol demanded. Then came the moment that shattered Nicholas's reality. Judge Kingswell turned to him and said, "Mr. Ward, before we proceed I need to clarify something with your father." He shifted his gaze back to me. "Jonathan, it has been a long time." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Kingswell calling a defendant by first name? Unheard of. Nicholas shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, what is going on here?" Judge Kingswell ignored him completely. "Mr. Ward," he repeated, "before we begin, I must confirm, are you still bound by federal confidentiality?" A heavy, suffocating silence fell. Nicholas frowned. "Confidentiality? What is he talking about?" I inhaled deeply. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I remain bound. My retirement was conditional." That was the most I could say without violating federal law. The judge nodded as if he had expected that answer. Then he leaned back, eyes softened not with sympathy, but respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steadying, "there is information pertaining to Mr. Ward's past service that cannot be disclosed in this courtroom." Clayton Pierce erupted. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We demand full transparency." "You will sit down, Mr. Pierce," Judge Kingswell snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "The court is not authorized, nor foolish enough, to unseal classified federal material." Classified. That word alone sent the room spiraling. Nicholas looked at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning panic. "Dad, what is he talking about?" I didn't answer. Some truths protect by remaining silent. Judge Kingswell continued. "For the purposes of this case, all I can legally state is this. Mr. Jonathan Aurelius Ward served this country in ways that will never be publicly acknowledged, but which have saved countless lives including mine." Gasps ruptured the tension. The judge pressed on. "When I was a federal prosecutor, I was the target of a retaliation attempt by a criminal network. My safety and the success of the case would have been compromised if not for the actions of a man working quietly behind the scenes. That man was Jonathan Ward." Nicholas's face drained of color. Vivian Moreau covered her mouth. Even Eleanor Kensington Ward froze, her confidence collapsing under the weight of truth she never imagined. Judge Kingswell continued, his voice softer now. "I am alive because of him. My career exists because of him. Justice itself was upheld because of him." He looked directly at my son. "And you, Mr. Nicholas Ward, had the audacity to accuse this many our father of being unworthy of his own father's legacy?" Nicholas's lips parted. No words emerged. All the speeches he rehearsed, the arguments he memorized, evaporated like mist. The judge wasn't done. "To be clear," he said, turning to the entire courtroom, Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward knew exactly who his son Jonathan was. He knew what he accomplished, what he sacrificed. And he left his estate accordingly. He closed the file with a sharp thud. "This court will not tolerate slander disguised as legal action." My heart tightened, not in pride but in pain. This wasn't the way I ever wanted my son to learn the truth. But secrets kept too long tend to erupt. Nicholas finally found his voice, low and broken. "Dad, you never told me. I swallowed the ache in my throat. You never asked, Nicholas. The judge exhaled, leaning back. Now, he said, let us proceed. But as the trial continued, one thing was certain. Nothing in this courtroom was the same anymore. Not the case. Not the power dynamic. Not the truth. And definitely not my son. Because in that moment, Nicholas finally realized he hadn't dragged a powerless father into court. He had dragged a man with a past he could never compete with, never comprehend. A man he had underestimated his entire life. When Judge Atticus Kingswell lifted his gavel again, the entire courtroom held its breath. It wasn't just a piece of wood Anna Marie, it felt like the weight of the Ward legacy itself. He surveyed the room, his gaze sharp enough to cut through stone. This court, he began, voice steady and resonant, has reviewed all evidence, all testimonies, and the letter of Chief Justice Hamilton Royce Ward. He paused. He looked at Nicholas. Not with anger. Not with pity. But with disappointment, a disappointment so deep it could drown a man. Mr. Nicholas Ward, the judge continued, you have accused your father of fraud, manipulation, and undue influence. Nicholas swallowed hard. His hands trembled on the table. But what you have presented is not evidence, the judge said. It is entitlement. It is speculation. It is resentment masquerading as righteousness. A murmur swept the courtroom. Pierce whispered something to Nicholas, but Nicholas didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on the judge, wide and dark with slow-building dread. Judge Kingswell folded his hands. The court hereby dismisses every claim brought against the defendant, Mr. Jonathan Aurelius Ward, with prejudice. Pierce stood abruptly. Your Honor. One more word, the judge snapped, and I will find you in contempt. Pierce dropped back into his chair like a puppet with severed strings. Nicholas's lips parted in shock. He shook his head, trying to breathe. No, this isn't right, grandfather would have wanted. Judge Kingswell slammed the gavel. Grandfather made his wishes abundantly clear. You simply refused to see them. He lifted the Hamilton letter again, the crest gleaming under the overhead lights. In this letter, the Chief Justice writes that Jonathan understood sacrifice, integrity, and the quiet burdens of service. He turned to Nicholas. And you, Nicholas, you understood none of these. Nicholas's voice cracked. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't my father? He stopped, realizing he was speaking as though the courtroom wasn't full of ears waiting to devour every word. The judge regarded him with a softer gaze. Because some truths, he said gently, are earned, not given. A tear finally broke down Nicholas's cheek, falling silently against the smooth surface of the plaintiff's table. Eleanor Kensington Ward reached out to touch his arm, but Nicholas flinched away, shame overtaking him like a wave. Judge Kingswell straightened. As the will stands, the entirety of the Ward estate legally belongs to Mr. Jonathan Ward. All costs and damages are assigned to the plaintiff. Nicholas's breath hitched. He whispered, barely audible. I didn't mean for it to go this far. My chest tightened. Because for the first time. For the very first time. I saw something in my son's eyes that had been missing for years. Realization. Regret. Humanity. The arrogance had cracked. And beneath it sat a frightened boy who no longer understood the world he had tried to conquer. Judge Kingswell lowered his voice. Mr. Ward, he said to me, you may address the court if you wish. I stood slowly. Not to gloat. Not to retaliate. But because if I didn't speak now, Nicholas might drown in his own silence. I turned toward him. My son, I said softly. I didn't want this. I never wanted to fight you. Nicholas looked up, his eyes red, his voice barely a whisper. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Because you never asked, I replied. And because the truth I carried wasn't a trophy, it was a burden. He pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so damn sorry. My throat tightened. Not in triumph, but in grief. The judge cleared his throat once more. This court is adjourned. The final gavel strike echoed through the room like the closing of a chapter. A chapter written in pain, pride, and a family name both honored and betrayed. And as everyone rose, one truth settled heavy in the air. The case was over. But the wound between father and son. That battle had only just begun. When the gavel fell for the final time, it felt less like a verdict and more like the collapse of an era. The spectators rose. Reporters swarmed. Lawyers whispered. The courtroom emptied in a flurry of hushed astonishment. But for me, time moved differently. Slow. Heavy. Like grief. Nicholas remained seated long after everyone else had left. His hands covered his face, his shoulders bowed not in defiance, but in the quiet, devastating posture of someone finally seeing the wreckage he created. I approached him cautiously, not as a victor, not as a wounded father, but simply as a man who still loved his son more than pride allowed me to admit. He lifted his head when he sensed my presence. Dad, his voice cracked. I ruined everything. No, I said softly. Everything isn't ruined. Hurt, yes. Damaged maybe. But not ruined. He shook his head violently. I dragged you to court. I humiliated you. I let Mom twist my mind. I believed you were nothing less than nothing. His voice broke. You saved people. You saved that judge. You carried things I can't even imagine, and I stood here accusing you of weakness. You didn't know, I said. And I couldn't tell you. But why? He whispered. I exhaled. Because my work wasn't mine to share. And because I wanted you to form your own identity, not live in the reflection of secrets you didn't choose. Nicholas blinked rapidly, tears clinging to his lashes. I thought grandfather loved me more, he whispered. I thought if I got the inheritance, it would prove something. My chest tightened. Nicholas' inheritance doesn't prove worth. Character does. He let out a broken laugh. Maybe I don't have any. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Then build it, I said quietly. It's never too late to become the man you're supposed to be. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he did something that hollowed my heart and filled it at the same time. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead into my shoulder, just like he did when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. Dad, I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I rested a hand gently on the back of his neck. You're my son, I murmured. And no lawsuit, no anger can change that. The media frenzy didn't disappear overnight. The War of the Wards made headlines for weeks. Commentators speculated endlessly. A son suing a father, then breaking down in court. A judge who recognized the defendant as a federal ghost. A hidden letter that flipped the entire case. But none of that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was Nicholas. He stopped giving interviews. Stopped listening to Eleanor's poisonous whispers. Stopped wearing his arrogance like armor. Instead, he came to my home one evening. Not with lawyers or demands. But with a small box in his hands. Inside were childhood mementos. A broken chess piece we glued back together. A faded photograph of us fishing. And the tie I taught him to knot. I want to start again, he said quietly. If you'll let me. I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in years, I saw traces of the boy I once knew. The door has always been open, I replied. He nodded, tears threatening again. "And Dad, I want you to teach me," he said. "Teach me the things I never cared to ask about." "Everything?" I asked. "Everything." Weeks later, I stood alone on the balcony of my father's estate. The evening sun cast a golden glow across the ward land built on generations of law, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. I held my father's letter in my hands, the words that saved me, saved my dignity, and ultimately saved my son. "You walk in shadows so others may walk in the light. You are my legacy." I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Father, for everything." And as the wind rustled through the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt since the trial began. Peace. Not because the battle was won, but because something far more important was saved. My son. Justice had ended in the courtroom. But the real justice, the kind my father believed in, had only just begun.